Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Power Man podcast. My name's Rory Paquette. I know you know that. I just like to remind myself of how blessed and how grateful I am to be sitting in this chair. Folks, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be. So I want to make sure that I say thank you at the beginning of every episode. When we moved to 5 days publication, you folks just showed up like there was no tomorrow. I couldn't even believe it, and I'm eternally grateful for what you did, because that also prompted us to then make the next move to 7 days a week, which is where we are now. And you guys are still there, and you're doing great. I appreciate the shares, the likes, the subscribes, and the DMs, you guys. We get the best DMs sent to us. So don't stop. Whatever you're doing, don't stop. As long as you're doing what you're doing, I get to keep doing what I'm doing. So, all right. If you're a friend of the program, you know what time it is. We got to pay a couple of bills. So I got to take a sip of my preferred beverage real quick. Ooh, really hot. Just made that up. Man, you guys know what we're drinking. That's right. It's Freedom Hill Coffee at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Look them up, check them out. Deep, dark, rich, bold, and beautiful. Just like my wife. They are absolutely a fantastic company. They do all the right things for all the right reasons. They support veterans, which is biggest reason why we support them here at the Power Man. You guys all know how important veterans are to us here. If you are a veteran out there, man or a woman, folks, we love you. Thank you for your service. And this is your home. You know what we're drinking. It is Freedom Hill Coffee at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Go check them out. Let me get one more sip of this so I can keep up with this guy across the table from me. And you know we'll be drinking that throughout. All right. We have quite the accomplished guest today, folks. He is the founder of Theophany Media, which I'm going to let him explain to you. And he's the author of several books, AI in Church and Ministry, Who We Are, Seven Identities to Shape Your Life. He is also the host of the hit podcast, Christianity Without Compromise, for Christians choosing Jesus over every idol. Folks, this guy has a great message to bring here today. I cannot wait to hear it and can't wait to talk to him. Please welcome to the show, Jake Doberenz. Jake, how you doing today, brother?
Oh man, privileged to be here.
Thank you.
Excited. Yeah.
Thank you. I loved a lot of the ideas in the stuff that I read that you put out there. Before we start, getting into all this and really tearing it apart as we look through it. What to tell everybody? Who is Jake? What are you about, brother, and what brings you here today?
Oh man, I always tell people I wear a lot of hats. I mean, you read that bio, I do a lot of different things. You don't like to be tied down into one thing. So podcasting over here, writing over there. I get the chance to preach once a month at a little small little rural church in Oklahoma. I just, do a little bit of this, do a little bit of that. So it is so difficult to kind of, I don't know, summarize me. Um, but a lot of kind of the thread of a lot of my interests is that I'm just kind of communicating centralities, just ways and some creative ways, some more direct ways, some less direct ways. I have fiction books too to add to that list of nonfiction books you read, and they're not like explicitly Christian, but they also talk about these ideas and challenge some of the mainstream narratives of culture and all that stuff. So that's just kind of what I'm about.
Nice, nice. Now, your entire idea on religion and Jesus and the whole nine yards has been through quite a transformation since you were younger, and that's what I was reading. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when I was younger, I actually had the privilege of knowing everything. I just had all the answers. It was so great. When I was 17, I just happened to have all the right answers. It's so convenient that it works like that.
Right.
Um, I was always raised very religious and I got really passionate about it, which is not a bad thing to be passionate about your faith. But I definitely took it into some kind of destructive areas sometimes and told everybody else how they're wrong and where their eternal destination was and things like that. That was just probably not the most healthy in my heart.
Oh man, I understand. I understand. A lot of folks kind of start off that way. They think they know that they're right and everybody else is wrong, and they I think you use the phrase beating people over the head with the Bible.
Yeah, Bible thumping a little too much, I guess, right?
Right. Now, what was it that made you start to reform that thinking and start to look at things a little differently?
Well, I mean, weirdly, and I say weirdly because I think some people are surprised by this, but it was actually college. It was my biblical studies degrees, where there are some people, and I witnessed it firsthand. There are some people that went into those degrees and became like who I once was. Oh well, I have a degree in this. I know everything, and nobody else knows anything, and stuff like that. Um, but I had kind of an opposite experience where I realized, man, things are kind of complicated, and there are some really smart people that believe different things than me, and that was crazy. Um, and I kind of had this idea of like, oh, the challengers are going to be this, the professors are going to say this. Then they didn't say stuff like that, and they weren't quite the straw men that I had expected, and that just threw me for a loop. And I was at a Christian college, um, learning from Christians and all that, but I saw a more diversity of opinions and experience, and I think over time it just humbled me. And I kind of got to actually fall in love with the person of Jesus. And that's what surprises people because again, like it can be the case where you really learn and study the Bible so much, you just kind of get wrapped up into it, and then you have more of a relationship with the rules, with the law. But for me, it was kind of the opposite. Oh, maybe it started like that, but eventually it's like, oh man, there's so much mystery here, but at the center of it is this guy Jesus, and man, he is pretty cool. The things he does like are not what you expect half the time. Some of the things he says you don't really like very much, but he's so compelling, and there's something so interesting there. And I was like, yeah, I got to center my life on that guy, and less about me having all the right answers and being the smartest guy in the room. Not that I maybe I still struggle with some of that stuff a little bit of wanting to be the smartest guy in the room, but I'm not the 16-year-old fire and brimstone preacher I once was, I guess.
I understand. I understand. So, all right, so you mentioned that you were heavily into apologetics and creationism. So, can you just give somebody an example of kind of what you were doing with that, and then what changed and why?
Yeah, what started a lot of this fire was actually so backing up a tad bit, my dad owned a Christian bookstore, which was a really great experience. Even though even 15 years ago or whatever is not the best time to own an independent bookstore. But it was great because you get to be exposed to all these resources and things. And sometimes my dad would go on road trips, go on the road, and sell at different lectureships and conferences and speaking events. He would be the bookseller guy there at the conference, and so I would get exposed to even more speakers and more ideas. And there's this one particular trip I went with him in the summer and learned about this apologetics thing. And again, it was like, oh, that's really awesome. I'm right and everybody else is wrong. Like that makes you feel pretty good. And you kind of know, oh, this is all the ways that I'm right and I can prove it and things like that. Um, and that contributed right to that spirit of the smartest guy in the room and everybody else is kind of dumb and things like that. And so that was just that world of apologetics and creationism. It's not necessarily that the ideas are bad, but what I found was sometimes the approach, if you didn't kind of rein it in, really led to kind of some hatred of other people, some suspicion. I just didn't view people well who viewed things differently than me or who didn't know things. Christians, atheists, whatever. I was like, well, I can prove my stuff because of this and that and the other, and you're dumb and things like that. And this was not good. And so when I went to college and stuff and things got more complicated, as a part of my process of losing that spirit of pride, I came to kind of distance myself from that. Again, some of the ideas are good, but the approach could be really dangerous. And I knew a lot of people around me too who were really into that stuff, into proving God and proving the Bible. And there's dangerous territory. If you're not careful, all of a sudden, you tend to worship kind of a logical system of thought, and you tend to view other people really poorly, and you forget about um, I don't know if I want to say the emotional side of faith, but just that faith is more than just A plus B equals C kind of thinking.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. So your dad's bookstore gave you access to all of these different ideas and thoughts and things like that. And that's kind of what started you down that road, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I am indebted to a lot of those ideas because that's how I ended up becoming a Bible major, and then I got a master's in biblical studies and things like that. Um, because I was the only fifth grader on the block who was like, "Ooh, I want to talk about the Bible and what happened here in the historical context of that." Not a common thing, and so that started me down a really great journey. And again, the problem is not the information; the problem is what you do with that information.
Right. And this may be where the idea about idols comes in. You've written a lot about worshiping
Mm.
false idols and things like that, and then you've tied those idols to some fairly specific things. Maybe you can speak to the idol worship and how you're feeling about that, and then maybe give everybody a couple of examples of what you're talking about.
Yeah, so like when I grew up, I mean, we talked about idols. Obviously, you go through the Old Testament, big problem all over the place, time and time again. It's like Israelites, what are you doing again? Come on. Um, and when that was talked about in sermons and things, or in Bible class, Sunday school, whatever, to me the idea seemed to kind of be it was just whenever you shoved God down a few slots, and then you put something else on top there. And I remember specifically at one time, one of the examples was um, you played video games late on Saturday night, and so you slept in and missed church on Sunday. Video games is now an idol for you. So that's kind of the idea. I thought, okay, it's
I see.
or another case would be you chose soccer. You chose the soccer game on Sunday morning instead of going to church. It was almost always instead of going to church. That's what it meant. Something else that kept you from church. Um, and as I studied the Bible and tried to kind of put myself in the shoes of these Israelites, because I asked myself the question, why would you worship like a statue? Like, what in the world is the appeal to that? Because most of us modern people, that's not a major issue. I mean, maybe some people have problems with that, but it's not really a temptation, so to speak. At least in the Western culture, typically. Um, and I realized that the issue wasn't necessarily, prioritizing something. Improper prioritization is part of it, but a lot of the chief issue comes down to, I think people are scared, and we worship idols to kind of hedge our bets, to have kind of an extra safety net, to have something else there. Because when an ancient Israelite worshiped Baal, this storm god in Canaan, it was kind of an extra protection of, well, in case Yahweh God doesn't give us the rain, maybe this guy will come through. Somebody will come through here. Somebody's going to help us out here. Or, there'd be these fertility gods. As we see in scripture, a recurring theme was people not being able to have children when they wanted to, and things like that. So it can be really tempting to go to the fertility god. And it's like we go to these specialists. Like that's the attraction of polytheism, I think, because some of the gods are specialists. And just like today, like we want to go to the podiatrist, not a foot doctor, right? If we have a problem with our foot, like we go to the
Right.
specialist. It's hard. We don't. God of the universe, the one of the Bible, is a generalist, and so sometimes it can be hard to kind of understand that no, God literally knows everything. Um, And so I think we fall into these traps of idols. And so today, instead of just saying, oh, you went to the soccer game instead of church, well, that could be an idol in a way. A lot of idols are like, oh, well, we put so much of our faith in what the political situation is, or oh, we put so much of our faith in the ways that we want to control situations, um, or technology. We rely so much on technology. A lot of times, it's putting something right next to God instead of necessarily over God, but we're just not always sure God can actually protect us. And so we say, well, maybe I can have my technology over here. Maybe I can have my politics over here. Maybe I can have this or that just to kind of protect me in case God doesn't follow through.
Nice. Okay, so it's kind of that Pascal's wager thing where you're just
Yeah,
covering all your bets and stuff and hedging your bets. I
pretty
understand.
much, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
right. I understand. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna believe in God because if there is one, then I'm covered, and if there isn't one, then it doesn't matter, because I'll just do it anyway.
Exactly.
And it's not real faith. No, I understand. I understand. I understand what you're saying. The let me scoot over here just for a second because you wrote a couple of books. Um, and it sounds like you wrote more than just these couple of books. These are the nonfiction books that I found
Mhm.
for you, right? What made you start writing books in the first place, to use that as a medium, and what was your purpose in doing that?
I've always liked writing and communicating with words. In fifth grade, I first kind of figured out, hey, I kind of have a knack for this thing. I kind of like this communicating things through words and stories and stuff like that. Um, and it was always my intention to be an author. It sounds weird to say that, but I was going to do that. And my original goal was I wanted to publish a book before I turned 18 because I thought that sounded cool and people would really like me and stuff. It didn't happen like that, and that's okay. But my first book, the Who We Are book, my first published nonfiction, well, my first book overall, um, happened because it was based off of some classes I was teaching. I was doing college ministry for a time at a church, and it was rather simple to say, yeah, I did all this lesson planning, all this work. Let me turn it into a book version to talk about these identities we have and things like that.
Hmm.
And so that became very easy. But yeah, I mean, as close to like destiny as I can think of it, it was just I was always going to be a writer. That was just what's going to happen. It was just a matter of what am I writing about? When is it happening? All that kind of stuff. Just always have enjoyed that process.
Nice. And so, who were you writing the books to?
Yeah, for the Who We Are, I was definitely envisioning like 20 something Christians. Was
Awesome.
definitely and I would say so like I am 28 years old. I'm not you know the oldest wisest person in the world, and again remember I'm trying to work on my whole pride thing. And so oftentimes for me it's like the audience I try to reach is just people a few years behind me, like because I do believe I can be a mentor and I can give advice to people of all ages, of course, but I know a few more things than somebody else on certain topics, and so I can talk to those people. But I've always been really fascinated with that kind of 20 something college age group. I'm not too far removed from that, but it's such a time of turmoil and trying to figure out calling and identity.
Yeah.
I've had so many struggles in that. And when I do think I figure a few things out, I want to tell people about it. So maybe not all my writing, but a lot of my writing, I'm imagining somebody, a few years younger than me, or really a version of myself from like 5 years ago.
Hmm. Nice. Okay, great. That I absolutely can understand that, especially with the subject matter. So now, did the books come first, or did the podcast, or did the media company? I'm curious what the progression was with all of that because you do a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I think technically the book came first, although it was published around the same time as the media company because I got a small press publisher for that, and publishing takes a very long time if you go the quote unquote old fashioned route.
Sure.
And so it was somewhere around that time. But I originally started my media company because I wanted kind of a base of operations for all my crazy schemes and ideas. And so in 2020 is when, so early 2020, I think, is when my book came out. And then a few months in is when I started my media company. Originally just to house my podcast, and I was going to do more books and publishing. And, if it was a creative way to communicate, I was probably considering it. I even had plays. I'm a published playwright as well, and I had a couple short plays on the site for a bit there.
Oh, wow.
Uh, Over time, though, I said, okay, I can't do everything, and I had to basically focus my company on podcasting. So I made the switch of I want to do podcasting as my main media. So produce some shows myself, but then also I help other people create shows that are supported by my company rather than like kind of run by my company sort of thing. And I just kind of narrowed that focus. I don't like to be narrowed a lot. I don't like to, but there's some wisdom in just saying, okay, this is my thing. And I can play around and hobby and do some hobbyist stuff here and there, but this is my main thing that I'm going to become maybe not an expert in, but really get into my craft and know the landscape and things like that. So the
Excellent.
the company kind of came out of that, and I'm still writing books and stuff, but um, they're kind of not the main focus. Although I probably should, because making money from podcasting isn't always the easiest thing to do in the world. And I would love people to listen to my podcast and be like, "Wow, Jake's cool. Let me buy his book." But I need to have a couple more books out too. I think,
Right.
especially because it's been a few years, and I like to think I'm smarter and a better writer than I used to be.
No, I like that. I'm sure you are. So, and not everybody can put together a media company and help other podcasters. So,
Mhm.
if you don't mind me asking, obviously I'm interested in this because I'm a podcaster too, but what is it you offer to other podcasters, on your platform and through your media company, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, no, of course. Um, I'm essentially offering mostly packages where we come and do the heavy lifting of the podcast besides the recording part. Like, we pretty much do everything except you got to get somebody and talk on the microphone and things like that, and come up with some subjects and stuff that you know about. I am mostly working with kind of established businesses and some coaches and some nonprofits, um, who are using podcasts to support another aspect of their thing. So
Got it.
the podcast isn't the business, but it is a part of the marketing channel for the business. That's typically who I'm working with. Uh, and so we can come alongside and do different pieces of the puzzle. We have some more options for, like, well, we can just talk strategy with you and stuff like that if you want to do most of the things yourself. But typically, what we're doing is we are the agency coming in and doing the nitty gritty details that some companies like, I don't want to figure this out myself. Or, just because we have a Gen Z intern doesn't mean they know everything about podcasting. Just because you listen to Joe Rogan once doesn't mean you know everything about podcasts. Like, and so they bring us in to kind of help out with aspects of that. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, I got you. Yeah, very true too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, listen to Joe Rogan doesn't make you a star. It just makes you a fan. So,
That's right. Yeah, it's just, yeah.
yep, gotcha. Now let's talk about the podcast for a minute because I mean it's a great podcast. You do solo episodes and you do interview episodes. If somebody has not heard your podcast before, they hear this, they want to tune into your podcast to see, what it's about. What types of people do you bring on, and what are you talking about? What are you trying to accomplish through your podcast?
Yeah. So my podcast is really designed for people that maybe feel kind of religiously homeless in a way. Um, we don't take the middle of the road just for the sake of taking the middle of the road, but we find it is so easy in human nature to pendulum swing to extremes. So you have these people that are like, I'm not really liberal. I'm not really that super conservative. And it's like, where am I? Where do I fit in? Um, and everybody, whatever aisle, whatever side of the aisle you're on, whatever kind of extreme you're on, just can get really distracted. And so the main focus of Christianity Without Compromise is to help us stop being distracted by things that just don't truly matter. We want to focus on what does really matter, and that's the person of Jesus. That's actually what matters. And so, yeah, we call these things idols, and we talk about smashing the idols. And so, all kinds of overemphasis and hangups and distractions and things. Sometimes the idols are like, maybe neutral things or good things even. Sometimes they're just very bad, and we just why are we getting distracted with this? Well, we've had episodes on like um church growth and how we can get really hung up on how many people are in their seats on Sunday morning. It's like, okay, hold on, no, that's not the most important metric here. What about discipleship? What about what's going on inside the heart and stuff like that? And we've had episodes again on like technology and how that can be distracting. We've had different stuff about uh, again about politics, just because that. About how the Bible can be like an idol, can be like something we focus so much on and miss. Hey, but God's hanging out here, and we need to have a relationship with the God, and not just use the Bible as that proof text and uh, Bible thumping too literally kind of thing. So we just explore these different topics where um, just so many Christians and churches have just lost the plot, just gotten so distracted. We just want to bring them back, and I think there's a lot of people longing for that. And again, I talk a lot to 20 somethings and people of kind of that generation who I believe that they're not like anti spirituality. They're not even necessarily anti Christian, but they've just seen some expressions of faith that are just nasty, and they just want something more genuine. And I'm just trying to create a space for that and having guests on that are interesting people that kind of fit that vibe that probably wouldn't necessarily label themselves one way or the other, although some do. Some do. We've had all sorts of different people on there. Um, and just kind of explore what is it really all about. And it is all about Jesus, and ultimately that's what it comes down to.
Nice. I love that the focus of what you're doing is to focus on the individual relationship with Jesus. I think that's just really important. So I agree with you 100% on that. The it sounds like it's tough to do to reach enough people if you're sort of anti-church. And I'm not saying you are,
Mm,
but what I hear from a lot of people who have, like men in our men's group who have problems with, religion, for instance, they don't have a problem with Jesus. What they
sure.
have a problem with is, the guy who's leading the sermon who tried to sell him a T-shirt 3 times during the, the speech, on Sunday morning, and he's kind of like, I get it. You're selling
Yeah.
T-shirts. This is the third time you brought it up. Okay. Can I just get the sermon and the message today? Is that all
Yeah.
right? So, it almost sounds like that's the type of thing that you're sort of speaking out against. Am I close?
Right. Yeah. Like, so one phrase I use a lot is like just kind of the performative religion. The kind of thing that Jesus was not a fan of when like the Pharisees looked really cool, but it wasn't just, but their heart was in the right place, or definitely to your mention of kind of corrupting certain aspects of the church with sort of that consumeristic kind of mindset or whatever, anything like that. We're not anti-church, but we have to admit, in the last 2,000 years, the church has done some not great stuff. We have some receipts, okay? We
Sure.
cannot hide that. We cannot hide that, and we shouldn't. But I never tell people to give up on church. I just say there are versions of church you need to give up on that are just not good. Um, but luckily there is a fullness of Christian expression. There are a lot of churches in the world, and not all of them, and maybe even most of them, are good. Like a lot of them are good, and there are communities that you can find and invest in. And I never want people to fall into the trap of thinking they can do it by themselves, or the Church of One.
Mhm.
We're not starting the Church of Jake Doberenz. Nobody should go to that church. Um, no, it's not the Church of One. We still want a community. We still want this, but let's be honest with where we've misstepped. And I think a lot of young Christians, especially, or a lot of young people, they can look out their window and see, oh, but that was not great. And I say, you're right, it wasn't great. But luckily, there are other churches doing better things.
Nice. I appreciate you clarifying that, and that was a
Yeah.
great explanation. Great explanation.
Yeah.
Um, there was something in your profile where you mentioned one idol that the church in America needs to, sort of um, counteract sort of immediately. Did I pick that up correctly? Is there one thing that you've kind of identified, focused on that's sort of, more of a bigger threat than a lot of the other things in terms of people making it an idol?
Yeah, I so ultimately I'll say that every idol comes down to control half the time. To me, it all comes down to about control. But lately I've been researching and hopefully have a book in the works. Well, I do have a book in the works about efficiency.
Okay.
And that's a subject that I've been wrestling with a lot, of just our need to streamline things in our daily lives and make things easier, and um, sometimes take some shortcuts. We live in a world of artificial intelligence, and that's changed some things. And that's, again, like, I'm not against making your life easier. Like, that's fun. But we also have to really wrestle with, but what are the ramifications when I do that? And I've shared a story before of, like, when I was in, I don't know, seventh grade or eighth grade or something, where we didn't have a track at school, so we had to run the track to get our mile in for PE or whatever it was. We kind of ran this circuit on the sidewalk, and there was this patch of grass, narrow patch of grass, and on kind of a corner where the PE teacher couldn't really see, and a lot of people would shave off like maybe like 30 seconds, maybe like what, barely any time, to just cross through the grass instead of staying on the sidewalk like they were supposed to. The rules were stay on the sidewalk. And there's just this human temptation of, it will save us 30 seconds. But if I just jump over this grass here, walk through the grass, I won't have to run as long. It'll be 30 seconds less or whatever, because it saved like no time at all. And if you were caught, you'd have to start the entire thing over again. So it'd be terrible for you. And I just reflect on that as like, man, that is so human nature of gotta save the littlest piece of time. And sometimes, a lot of times, what that means is we're breaking some rules, or ignoring something that's really important. And when something like efficiency becomes a big deal, we often steamroll over people involved, um, where there are human beings around us in life, and we ignore them because we're so set on optimizing our life or life hacking, something like that. And that's a major theme. I don't know if that's the theme you were talking about, but that's something that I've picked up and writing a lot about. And I mentioned that a little bit in my profile. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. When people think of idols, for instance, they immediately, I think, their minds go to like a person,
Sure.
or even an institution, like the church itself, or some kind of thing like that. They don't think of it in terms of a concept.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I asked that question, is because I think that people need to kind of open up their minds a little bit about the idolatry and what it is you are actually idolizing, because it doesn't always have to just be a someone, or even a something. It can be an idea. And it sounds like that's where you're going with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the ideas are more dangerous because, kind of as you pointed out, we don't see them. We don't are aware of just these worldviews and cultural streams that play a role in our lives and things like that. We just assume, well, if it's this is the American way, must be right or whatever. This is what all my friends are doing, right? And my mom taught me very early on, if all your friends are jumping off a bridge, don't do it. And so we have to be aware of those kind of lines of thinking and those abstract ideas that permeate, and we just assume, oh, that's just how things are, right? That's how I have to act. No, not necessarily. Jesus is our model for that. What would Jesus do? Wasn't far off. Like, that's pretty good saying still.
Sure. No, I love it. The as you're talking about this, we've talked earlier that a lot of most of my audience is men. Okay, and they've I would say especially the guys who listen to my podcast, and I hope I'm speaking well and representing you gentlemen out there. They've had a rough go of it for at least the last 6 to 8 years. There's been a lot they've had to overcome, and a lot that has sort of kept them down. That they fought against. A lot of them are trying to find their way. They're trying to maybe find a way back to Jesus after, maybe leaving, suffering some doubts. The way back is paved with idols like you're talking about. It seems like, and so I'm curious. Someone like you who has the focus you have and has put in the thought and the time that you have. Maybe is there any advice you can give to men who are trying to find their way back? Where do you start trying to rebuild that relationship with Jesus if you haven't had it for a while?
Well, I'll start with kind of identifying some idols, because when I was younger, another thing my mom used to say is she would get on, me and my brother's case about um, we watch too much TV or something, and I would say, no, I don't watch too much TV. I'm fine. I'm not addicted to it or anything. You say, okay, well, fine. We'll give up TV. If you're not addicted to it, it should be easy, right? Just stop for a week, for a month. Just don't watch any more TV. And I would say, okay, I could do that. I just don't really want to. Like, I'm just not going to do that. But I could. Like, if I really wanted to, I could. Well, I don't know. I think she had some wisdom there in helping identify of the things that are hardest to give up are oftentimes the idols that are dragging us down the most. When we cannot give up XYZ, okay, well, red flag, we need to look at this, and how is that keeping us from discovering Jesus, who has asked for our burdens. We don't need to be carrying this stuff. So I think it's important we identify those areas. And then the next thing I'll say, that I'll always say, is community is so important in all of this. And I know you have a community here around your podcast, and there are local communities all over the place in the world that we can plug into. When I wrote my book, Who We Are, the original title was Who You Are, and I was talking about identity, and I was talking to individuals, and then really quickly I realized this is a community project. To build a better Jake Doberenz is not a solo build. I need other people. I need wiser people to speak into my life. I have been privileged by people. Well, there's been a lot of people who have said some nasty things online, of course, but there's been a lot of people in my life who speak wisdom, who actually respect and say, shouldn't have said that, or hey, you can do this better, or I've noticed this in your life. We need that. We cannot do this thing alone. Um, Creating a relationship with Jesus is a community project. You have to make some decisions yourself. You have to decide, like, we can't totally outsource it to our church or our pastor, or hey, we show up on Sunday and watch a guy speak for 25 minutes, now I'm good. Like, it's not that, but we need that nonetheless. We need that aspect of other people and small groups and communities, and um, we all need people where we can say, you know what, this is what I'm struggling with. I just want to be honest with you. This is it. We'll lay it on the table here. That's who we need to surround ourselves with, and I think we can find Jesus in that. Because in those spaces where people really care, we can really begin to peel back all the distractions and all the mess and the hangups, and just say, hey, I'm ultimately a broken person and I need some help.
That's great. I love that. That's great advice. Great place to start. And I appreciate you taking that question. I did not prep you for that at all. I just hit you with that out of left field, and man, you knocked it out of the park. So I really, really appreciate you digging deep on that one. So thank you. Um, Listen,
Yeah.
Jake, you're doing a ton to further this. You're helping people. You're spreading a great word. Books, podcasts, the whole bit. I want to make sure that we're doing you justice and that we're getting your word out here. So as we kind of pull things together and wrap this up, um, I want to just kind of give you the floor for a minute. And what I'll say is there anything I didn't ask you? Is there anything that we talked about and maybe you want to drive home a little harder? Is there anything that maybe you want to leave behind? Some advice or last minute nugget or anything like that. The floor is yours. Okay, any of those things are fine. Go wherever you want. The floor is yours for the next minute or two. Go for it.
Yeah, well, whew, boy, yeah. I I think I want to touch on a little bit what I was saying earlier when I started talking about Christian identity. I think this is important and foundational to a lot of what I see now is making sure our identity is in Christ and not in anything. And I know I'm talking to some men here, so let's talk about some men stuff. And for me, like I haven't always been stereotypically masculine in all the ways that culture tells me and things like that. Having to learn my identity is in Christ and not in, you know, however much I can bench press or whatever. Um, more of a back squat guy, but that's just me. And so like that's not where my identity is. It's not in that. Um, I've felt the pain of rejection. Part of my story is divorce. That's in there. Where try as I might, and I really did everything I could. Ultimately, she didn't want to be a part of this marriage and checked out. And the level of rejection I felt was the lowest point I've ever felt in my life. Feeling like, oh, somebody I really invested in, I really liked, didn't like me at all. That's really hard. And learning, but my identity is in Christ and not in the rejections that people, send my way. And so I guess my final just I don't know, piece of wisdom, whatever it is just center your life in Christ. It is much more steady because the world will change their mind tomorrow. You know, one day this is the right amount to bench press. The next day it's this many pounds. I don't know, right? The world shifts in what they see as valuable, but Jesus is constant and Jesus takes you as you are. And I just think that's important for all of us to remember.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great close. And I'm sorry, about that too, that happened to you. That's rough. That's rough. But I know a lot of guys are nodding their heads going, yep, been there, understand.
I
Yeah.
know. Oh, I
So,
know it. I hear the stories. It's heartbreaking.
yeah. Appreciate you, man. Appreciate you bringing, your viewpoint and your belief and your advice to this group of men. Jake Doberenz, founder of Theophany Media, author, podcaster, occasional pastor,
Yeah.
and Christian brother. Thank you so much for coming on today and spreading the word and doing what you did. It really and truly was helpful.
Oh yeah. No, I loved being on here and talking about these things and yeah, even getting a chance to be a little more serious there at the end. I love it. I like lighthearted humor and stuff, but hey man, sometimes we just gotta get deep. Let's
Yeah,
just go. Let's bring it out there. So
right
thank you
on.
so much.
Great job, brother.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
All right, folks, that's another episode of the Power of Man podcast. The reason we bring powerful men like this on here and we talk about powerful subjects like we did today is because we want you to know that we are 100% behind you in your mission to reclaim your inner power, to become better protectors, better providers, better leaders tomorrow than you are today, to become better fathers, better husbands, better men tomorrow than you are today. And the reason that we want that for you is because you have value, you matter, and at some point, you just have to believe it. Until next time.